So, today we're going to dig into the tragedy of Germanwings Flight 9525. Now, many of us remember the headlines, but the full story, well, it reveals this really deep and unsettling conflict between an individual's right to privacy and the public's absolute need for safety. Let's explore what was really going on here.
It all happened on March 24, 2015. Germanwings Flight 9525, an Airbus A320, was making a routine trip from Barcelona to Dusseldorf. But as it was flying over the French Alps, it just vanished from radar. The wreckage was later found just scattered across this remote mountainside, and tragically, all 150 people on board were killed instantly.
In the first hours and days, investigators were just stumped. The plane was in perfect working order, the weather was clear, it made no sense. But then they got their hands on the cockpit voice recorder, and a chillingly simple fact came to light. The German state prosecutor put it just like this: one was in the cockpit and the other wasn't. And that one detail, that simple fact, would unlock this entire mystery.
To really get our heads around how this could happen, we have to reconstruct the aircraft's final, terrifying moments. So, let's take a look at the timeline.
So the flight reaches its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Totally normal, but just 1 minute later, the captain leaves the cockpit. 30 seconds after that, the plane begins to descend. And for 8 long, silent minutes, it just plunged toward the mountains. Air traffic control was trying again and again to make contact, but there was nothing. No distress call was ever made.
The flight data recorder, the other black box, confirmed everyone's worst fears. This was no accident. Someone in that cockpit had manually changed the autopilot's altitude setting from a safe 38,000 feet all the way down to just 100 feet, the lowest possible setting. This single action put the plane on a direct collision course with the Alps. The big question was, how could one person possibly do this?
And that brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, the cockpit door itself, a piece of technology that was designed for safety, but in this specific case, it actually enabled a catastrophe.
You see, after the September 11th attacks, cockpit doors were massively reinforced. They were made bulletproof, designed to be locked from the inside, all to stop hijackers from getting control of the plane. And this just shows you the tragic irony, right? A system designed to keep threats out created this brand new vulnerability from within.
The voice recorder captured the absolutely harrowing sounds of the captain trying to get back in. First, you hear him using the keypad to request entry, then some knocking. But as the plane keeps descending, the knocking becomes frantic, violent banging. And inside the cockpit, the only sound was the co-pilot's calm, steady breathing. So with the how pretty much established, the investigation pivoted to the why. Who was this man at the controls? Andreas Lubitz. And what on earth was he hiding? I mean, on paper, Andreas Lubitz looked like a competent professional. He started his training back in 2001, he was rated for the A320, and he had thousands of flight hours under his belt. His medical certificate was completely valid. By every external measure, he was fit to fly. But then, a search of his home revealed a shocking secret. Investigators found torn-up doctor's notes, sick leave notices, declaring him unfit for work, including one for the very day of the crash. Lubitz knew he was unwell, and he was actively hiding it from his employer. The official investigation went deep into his medical history, which pointed to a depressive disorder. Now, according to the official definition they used in the report, this is a condition that, when it gets really severe, can seriously impair a person's ability to function, and it can lead to suicide. And the details were just damning. Lubitz had gone through a severe depressive episode years earlier, which actually interrupted his flight training. He had told his psychiatrist about having suicidal thoughts, and after the crash, a toxicology report found antidepressants and a sleeping aid in his system. Suddenly, the picture was crystal clear. A pilot was flying a commercial airliner while battling a severe and completely undisclosed mental illness. But this tragedy wasn't just about one person. It blew the lid off some deep, systemic problems and really forced a global conversation about medical privacy versus public safety. And this is where we get to a core legal dilemma. In Germany, medical confidentiality is incredibly strict. We're talking criminal penalties for doctors who breach it. Disclosures only allowed to prevent a substantial and imminent danger. But then you look at places like the UK and the US, and they have a public interest exception. It allows a doctor to disclose information to prevent serious harm to others. So you can imagine Lubitz's doctors were caught in this impossible legal and ethical bind.
Aviation authorities, they try to manage risk with standards like this 1% rule. It's basically a statistical model that says a pilot is fit to fly if their risk of becoming incapacitated is less than 1% per year. Now, that works reasonably well for predictable physical things like heart disease, but it's incredibly difficult, almost impossible, to apply to the complex and unpredictable nature of mental illness.
And we just can't ignore the immense financial pressure he was under. Lubid still had a pretty big loan out for his training. And sure, he had loss of license insurance, but that one-time payout might not be enough to cover a whole lifetime of lost income. The fear of losing your dream career, your identity, and facing financial ruin, well, it creates a powerful incentive for any pilot to hide a medical condition that could get them grounded.
This quote from the official French accident report, it just sums it all up perfectly. The entire system relies on pilots being honest and reporting when they're not well, but that system completely breaks down when the personal cost of telling the truth, losing your job, your income, seems way, way higher than the risk of just flying one more flight.
So, what changed? In the wake of this absolute disaster, the aviation industry was really forced to act, and they put new rules in place to try and prevent this from ever happening again.
Almost immediately, a lot of airlines adopted a two-person cockpit rule, which just ensures a pilot is never left alone up there. There were also loud calls for a European database to better track pilot health across different countries. New, confidential support systems were put in place to encourage pilots to get help without fearing they'd be immediately punished. And, of course, psychological evaluations were strengthened. These were all concrete steps, all aimed at closing the gaps that Flight 9525 so tragically exposed. But this brings us right back to that fundamental question, one that has no easy answer. And this isn't just about aviation. Think about it. It applies to doctors, police officers, train drivers, really anyone whose job holds public safety in their hands. How do we create a system that protects the public while also protecting the rights and encouraging the honesty of the very professionals we all depend on? It's a balance we are all still trying to find.